amazing how often things will bubble to the surface when people are in an arena where they feel safe. They can go, gosh, I haven't thought about this for years, but I can remember when I was 8 and I was at primary school, and they'll come up with this random name, this girl, Jenny, she was making fun of me in the hallway. It gets very specific,
Yeah.
and, I had done this drawing and she told me that my drawing looked like poo, or, something in child
Yeah.
language, but that was pivotal for that child to go, wow, from that moment forth, especially as it relates to the feminine, I felt inadequate because, she represented the female. And so now any female authority figure, maybe this person is hired in a company where the CEO is a woman, and they're wondering why they can't seem to ascend the ranks, and they're not being picked to get an upgrade or a promotion, or, they find they get very nervous in the boardroom meetings, but they don't understand why. And as far as they're concerned, even the female CEO really admires their work and likes them, but they're still stuck in the trap of who I am relative to the feminine is inadequate. So that reveals it. We bring evidence to it, and then through process of investigation, I take them, I guess it's a bit of an IP to my process. Is I'll ask them to investigate the truth of that belief, and ask them to say, is it an actual truth, yes or no? And even though for them it feels very true, they can, use their discernment and intelligence and go, you know what, you're right, it's not a truth. It's been there for 30 years, so it feels very true. And at that moment, never gets old. There's a flood of tears, their breathing patterns change, and there's this feeling of complete relief of like, wow, that's dictated my life and defined me for decades.
And that's the mad thing, isn't it? Like all of us to some degree, and certainly up to a certain point, it feels to me that are driven by these stories that we create normally when we are, let's say under the age of 10, when we're egocentric, we misperceive events around us. So I think of, for example, let's say, you have a parent who's for their own reasons unable to be hugely loving in the way you want them to be, and rather than being able to obviously be mature enough and go, they're not able to be loving because of their own issues, you go, oh, I'm unlovable, and then that then drives you basically, for the rest of your life, and until you excavate it, right?
Yeah, absolutely. That's the world that we live in, which is full of madness and sadness and suffering and hostility and corruption and pretense and manipulation and domination, and then the myriad of different escape mechanisms that people need. It's a mess. I mean, you look at especially what's going on right now, and certainly when people get in positions of power and they have money and they've got these deep-seated foundations of inadequacy, scarcity, insecurity. Unfortunately, now they're wielding very big tools, called policies and government mandates, but they're still coming from a scared child who's really just trying to dominate to make themselves feel safe and of value. Yeah. So yes, it's a bit of a shit show, as they say.
Yeah, and so when we are young, right? Let's say we're rejected, and the feeling of rejection is not a nice one, and then. I mean, to what degree do you agree with this? We identify with that feeling. We identify, we give it perhaps a storyline as well. We identify with the storyline. So therefore, like you said earlier, reverse engineering that, it's disidentifying from our identification with thoughts, with the stories we hold about ourselves, whatever they may be. And on the one hand, they may be, I'm awful, but on the other hand, they may be, I'm better than everyone else, and that's two sides of the same coin, right? But so it's disidentifying from our identification with thoughts and feelings.
Correct.
Yeah.
No, beautifully you've done your work. It's as I said earlier, why I use the expression, I don't solve problems, I dissolve them. So it is that dissolution. In this case, it's the emancipation, not of circumstance, but of the idea of myself and the way that I react to circumstance. It's really pointing to, in Zen Buddhist terms, they use the expression neti, which is not this, not that. We can only point to who we are. We can't actually see it because we're the seer, right? That's sort of the beautiful, again, that sort of Zen koan kind of like paradox of I am consciousness, And I can only witness consciousness, which is myself, by virtue of seeing that is not me.
Yeah, yeah.
Right?
Which is why self-consciousness is such, that term, self-consciousness, is such a revealing term.
Yes, and it can have multiple, at least two, I would say, distinct interpretations. Right? We could say the person who's self-conscious, which is the idea of oneself, the ego or the I that is conscious of itself, versus, I would say, more self-awareness, which is self-consciousness. I'm aware of my true nature.
Yeah.
Right. So I think we could attribute self-consciousness more to the suffering, limited, confined version of ourselves, and self-awareness or awakening to, oh, I'm not Peter, British, and the things that become associated with the human form, they're helpful. If I'm walking down the street and someone knows me and they say, hey, Peter, like, I can turn around. I'm not like, no, I'm just consciousness. Like, who's they talking to? That's not going to work very well in society either,
Yeah.
But deeper knowing that this sort of avatar that is my portal into this domain is nonetheless precisely that. It's just an interface. It's not who I am.